So now let's go over the quotient rule. And the quotient rule that says that the derivative of a function that is h of x over g of x, it's a function over another function, is the derivative of the first function times the second function left alone minus the derivative of the second function times the first function left alone, all over the second function squared. And unlike in the product rule where it didn't really matter which derivative you took first, you could take the derivative of the second term first and multiply it by the first term. It didn't matter. In the quotient rule, it really matters because notice that there's a negative sign as opposed to a positive sign, and we're dividing by the denominator squared. So this is one that might take a bit more time to memorize, but it's really important that you get the sequence right. So let's try and prove this. So this expression is equivalent to this expression. H of x is equal to f of x times g of x. All I did was I multiplied both sides by g of x. And now we can take the derivative of h of x, and we know what that is because we know how to use the product rule. So that's just the derivative of the first times the second plus the derivative of the second times the first. And now what we're going to try and solve for is this derivative, because that's what we want to find out, what f prime of x is. So we're going to try and solve for this f prime of x. So I'm going to subtract both sides by g prime of x, f of x. So what we get is h prime of x minus g prime of x, f of x. And that's equal to f prime of x, g of x. Now I'm going to divide by this g of x. So h prime of x, h prime of x minus g prime of x, f of x, all over g of x is equal to f prime of x. And now what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to substitute h of x over g of x instead of f of x, because we don't want the function to be part of the function's derivative. So we want to get rid of this term, and instead of this term we're going to write that term because they're equivalent. So we get h prime of x minus g prime of x times h of x over g of x all over g of x. And now the next step that we're going to do is another one of those mathy kind of thinking ahead steps. We're going to want a common denominator with this term in the numerator and this term in the numerator. And that common denominator is going to be g of x. So in this term we already are dividing by g of x, but in this term we're not. So we're going to multiply and divide by g of x in this first term. So what we're going to get is h prime of x times g of x over g of x. And we're going to subtract this term, which is g prime of x on top times an h of x on top all over g of x. Divide that whole thing by this g of x right there. And what happens now is this common denominator and this denominator, we can put those together and we get h prime of x, g of x minus g prime of x, h of x all over g of x squared. And right there, that's the quotient rule. So once again, definitely you definitely want to memorize this, and you want to make sure that the derivative of the numerator comes first. The second term is the derivative of the denominator, and you're dividing by the denominator squared. And next video we'll go over 3 practice problems.